We know people of all ages and races are sometimes killed by law enforcement. Yet in 14 of the largest police departments in the nation, in 2015, in those 14 largest departments, only Black people were killed. Those departments were in St. Louis,
Atlanta,
Kansas City,
Cleveland,
Baltimore,
Virginia Beach,
Boston,
Washington, D.C.,
Minneapolis,
Raleigh,
Milwaukee,
Detroit,
Philadelphia,
Charlotte. Black people ages 20 to 24 are 7 times more likely to be killed by police than anyone else. And Black Americans are twice as likely as white Americans to be unarmed when they are killed. Last month, the acquittal of a white police officer in St. Louis who shot and killed a Black man sparked another outcry for racial justice. In 2011, Officer Jason Stockley and his partner thought they saw a drug deal happening. And so the young man got into his car, and it ended up leading to a 3-minute high-speed car chase, during which time the police officer, one of them, Jason Stockley, was recorded saying, "Gonna kill this." I'm not gonna say the word that he said in our sanctuary, but it is a horrible expletive. "Gonna kill this, don't you know it?" When the car stopped, the officers approached the car. Officer Stockley yelled to open the door. Stockley testified that Smith, Anthony Lamar Smith, did not comply, but instead seemed to be reaching around in the side of his car for something, which Stockley believed to be a gun. Stockley testified that Anthony Lamar Smith's behavior suddenly changed, his demeanor changed. And he said, which indicated to him he believed that he had found the gun, and fearing for his life, he opened fire through the window 5 times, striking and killing Anthony Lamar Smith. His life gone. Officer Stockley testified that he did find a handgun tucked between the passenger seat and the console. DNA experts found that the officer's DNA was on the gun, but Anthony Lamar Smith's DNA was not found on the gun. The judge found it difficult to believe that the gun had been planted by the officer, given that this whole thing had been video recorded and he did not have on a jacket or anything from which he could conceal the weapon. The judge also said that Smith's DNA, Anthony Lamar Smith, his DNA was found on the heroin that was in the car. And he said in his 28 years on the bench, an urban heroin dealer not in possession of a firearm would be an anomaly. I think we all know what urban is code for. So we have 2 people who are going to stand in this morning for Officer Stockley and Anthony Lamar Smith.
I could have been born Jason Stockley, or Darren Wilson, or George Zimmerman. It is possible that within a millisecond of seeing Anthony Lamar Smith on the street, these thoughts might have run through my head.
he's Black.
must be a drug dealer or a junkie. Typical for this neighborhood.
thugs carry guns.
He could hurt me. I have to protect myself.
I could have been born Anthony Lamar Smith, or Michael Brown, or Trayvon Martin. It is possible that within a millisecond of seeing Jason Stockley on the street, these thoughts may have run through my mind.
White cops.
Racist.
He has a gun. I better run.
He could hurt me. I've got to protect myself.
He could hurt me. I've got to protect myself. He could hurt me.
I've got to protect myself.
He could
He
hurt
could
me.
hurt me.
I've got to protect myself.
Take a breath. And Officer Stockley and Anthony Lamar Smith, can you see each other clearly right now? No. And can you think clearly right now? No. This is what bias, prejudice, and preconceived notions do. They get in the way of us being able to see what's actually happening in the moment. And notice that stereotypes come from both sides. Prejudice is not something that just white people have. But there is a difference, however, between prejudice and racism. Racism has been defined as prejudice plus power. Do you think that one of these two people had more power in this particular moment? Yeah, who do you think that might be? The officer? Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk in a moment about where that power comes from. Thank you. So this is actually the second time we've done this exercise here in this sanctuary. Susan Jellinger and I helped create this when Michael Brown was killed. I don't want to have to keep doing this exercise. But until white folks can understand where our place is in the undoing of white supremacy, we will have to continue doing this work. In the United States, people of color have said repeatedly that while people of color can have bias or prejudice, they cannot be racist. If racism is defined as prejudice plus power, then people of color don't have enough power to be able to dominate society. Only white people can do that. Only white people can be racist. Have you heard that idea before? Yes, some of you know, because you brought the movie to town, I'm Not a Racist, Am I? Where we learned of an exercise where they were talking about that. But if this idea challenges you, then I invite you to take it home with you. I invite you to look for and keep listening to people of color and to white people who talk about this idea, and to bring curiosity to your own understanding and to others. Racism is prejudice plus power. And prejudice is not the same thing as racism. Researchers at Harvard developed a test about 20 years ago that makes clear how having the power piece is necessary to create a kind of prejudice that can permeate society, that can permeate one's beliefs even when, or your mind, even when your beliefs refuse it. Even when those negative associations with race, even when they subsume or try to abandon your own identity. It's called the implicit association test. And in it, they ask people to make a series of rapid judgments about black people and white people, along with words that are positive or negative, so that they can look at people's thoughts and feelings outside of conscious awareness and control. Over 1 million people have taken this test, and researchers have found that most people indicate a preference with the positive associations with white people. Even while more than 50% of the people who ended up with that report reported that they have no preferences in those two racial categories. If you doubt this, I encourage you to also take that home with you, to look up implicit bias test, and you can try it yourself. It takes less than 10 minutes. Each time I have taken the test, I see and feel my hands and my brain struggling to move as quickly with associating black faces with the positive associations as I did with the white faces. And it breaks my heart, and it's so irritating to see. the authors of the study wrote, we would not say that people who show implicit bias are prejudiced. And at the same time, they say it's well established that people with implicit bias, that bias predicts their behavior. So if this is the case for the majority of people, regardless of race, then saying we won't nurture racist thoughts is not enough to end white supremacy. We can't just say, well, I'm off the hook because I don't believe those things, so now there's really no work for me to do on this issue. It's great if you seek to reduce or to counter the prejudice that society gives each of us. But even if all of those intentionally racist people, the people who not only have it in them implicitly, but also explicitly believe it and agree with those statements, even if all those people were suddenly gone, those intentionally racist people, white supremacy would still live on because there's power behind the pervasive presence of prejudice. There's power in white supremacy. It lives in the social structures of our economy, our culture, government, our educational systems, even our churches, this very church, our beloved Unitarian Universalism. It seeps into our beings even when we know it's toxic and it's incompatible with our deepestly held beliefs and our own identities. Rooting out the presence of white supremacy requires more than just thinking about casual attitudes or opinions. It requires learning, study, increasing our understanding of other cultures and ways of being, so that we don't end up equating, for those of us who are white, what is normal, what is human, with what it means to be white. And this is work that white people can do. I was at a training this last spring in New York City, and there was an African-American man who got up to speak, and he said, I hesitate to even come to things like this because then white people can feel like, oh, good, I did something good, and now I'm done. He said, I didn't want to wake up on a Saturday morning and trek myself all the way here to let you off the hook. But then he shared this powerful image, because he's saying, we can all have these beliefs, but what does it look like? What does your community and your circle of acquaintances, of friends, of people you trust actually look like? And if it's super segregated, then what are we doing at a conference about anti-racism if we just believe it in this room, but we don't live it out in our lives? And then he shared this idea. He said, imagine, it's like, he was talking about why people of color are encouraging white people to do this work themselves and among themselves. And he said, it is like a white person is standing with their foot on my neck, and I'm down there. And that we're up here saying, hey, you down there, how do I stop hurting you? And as well-intentioned as that ask may be, he's down there struggling to make a living, to stay safe, to find self-worth and self-love, in confronting all of the messages that are handed to him on a daily basis about the nature of his being based on the color of his skin. He said there's plenty of materials available that white people can look at to understand how white supremacy lives. There are plenty of readings, of books, of movies. There are opportunities right here in this congregation that white people can engage in, that we don't have to always wait. It's why one of the reasons I appreciate the term white supremacy, because it shifts the focus. When you say people of color or you say racism, it sounds like a problem people of color have, right? It's their thing to work on. But when we say white supremacy, it makes it very clear whose problem this is. And we can work to remove our feet by actually engaging in not just family stories or a casual article here or there, but actually deeply looking into ourselves and how these things function so that we can begin to make change. And if we do that work, and we actually study and build relationships, then as white people, we might, for those of us who are white here, we might begin to understand what kind of intentional training and relationship building would be needed to actually undo white supremacy. The kind of training that would be needed by a police department, by teachers, by administrators, by worship leaders, by religious educators, by politicians and elected representatives. The kind of training and education that we would need to actually wake up to the reality, not just our sense of it, but to move beyond and have some humility, to actually seek out voices and listen to people of color telling us what it is we need to know. Robin DiAngelo also says, racism is not like murder. Racism is not just a concept. Like murder is a concept until you actually commit it. But that's not what racism is. Racism doesn't require you to commit it for it to exist. Racism always exists. And so how are we going to take the invitations to lift up our foot and to examine and to not be segregated people who just have beliefs that you can tell when we say them aloud here with one another? And two of the ways that I am taking action on that in my own life is I have formed a group of clergy who are coming together from Amos who identify as white, and we're going to be looking at white supremacy together for the next 13 months. We're going to be using the safety pin box materials. There's some information in your order of service about this group, a group that has formed to say that Black people don't need to do all the emotional labor of this work, that white people can do that. They created a subscription series that we will pay for, white people will pay for, to receive this learning, and then invitations to tasks that we can take to actually benefit the lives of people of color. So we're not just talking and learning, but we're actually doing something too. And the other step that I am going to be taking, my family is going to work with Embark to do an adoptive family kind of family partnering program where we are going to seek a relationship with a refugee family to be in relationship with people whose stories I don't know. So I wonder for you, this topic may not be new. You may know so many of the things that I'm sharing this morning. I know many of you do. But I ask, what will it look like for you? And what is it already looking like for you to be lifting your foot and to be turning to create the world that we actually believe in? And the idea that each person is important, that all people deserve to be treated fairly, and that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people.